room for you to take away with you tonight. We have the California Diving and a plug for this amazing International Ocean Film Festival. Many of us go to it, but they're kind of hurting this year. They're not getting as much participation. The gala that's happening next week on the 20th has a sort of a low turnout. So if you're at all interested in supporting them, I would recommend looking at that because it really does fund all the educational programs they do on Saturday for all the kids of San Francisco to go free. So it's a fundraiser happening on March 20th. So I'm plugging that as a good thing if you have it in your heart to go to a nice gala and a charity benefit that's happening. And as well, many of us will attend this. So we'll have more information on that. And also our patches are for sale. And I think, Ken, how much do we sell? $10 a piece. So patches and whatever cards. Yeah, and business cards. Yeah, really carry those with you because Barb and I were somewhere and people were asking for our business cards and I only had 2 in my wallet. So if we all have a few and we've got 1 million of them, just take some with you. And if people are interested that you talk to coming to our club meetings, we always want new members coming. So tonight, tonight we're really fortunate to have a really great speaker. Nirupam, thank you for being here tonight. Nirupam is going to do a presentation called Finding and Photographing the Jewels of the Sea of Cortez. And I know Lisa Pearl has been on many of his trips and I intend to go on some in the future, but Nirupam's done a lot of work in the Sea of Cortez and I think just got back from there, I believe.
Socorro, actually.
Socorro, okay, yeah. Socorro.
Yes.
But he has been diving since he was 15. He was first introduced to underwater photography, and at the age of 22, he started as the editor-in-chief of the Underwater Photographic Guide online. So he's which is the world's leading underwater photography and video retailer. He's been leading trips all over the world. He resides in the Pacific Northwest, but he started, it said here, he received his degree in aquatic and fishery sciences and general biology, and Arctic studies were his minor. So he's been an observer of fisheries, spent many times in the Bering Sea and the North Pacific. And he calls himself a full-time underwater photographer and photo gearhead. He is an expert. I have used his guide to learn the Z8, which I just purchased, the Nikon Z8, and it was his video, 45-minute video that got me through all the buttons. And I was like, oh, this is so great online. So a whiz at that. But his underwater photography is amazing. So you're in for some beautiful shots tonight and more information about his upcoming trips, which I think he has one coming up to the Sea of Cortez as well. Without further ado,
yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks for having me again, guys. It's great to be back. Let's see, how many of you guys are photographers? It might be kind of hard for me to see the crowd.
I'll give you a view of the crowd. Hold on.
We got a couple online. Okay.
There we go.
So we've got a few. I try to gauge my advice and how I do my presentation based on the crowd, because it can either get really technical or less technical. So I'll try to keep it a little less technical, but I still got lots of tips for you guys as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Good share.
Okay. Here we go. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Let me go ahead and do the slideshow. Okay, great. So yeah, I thought this was an interesting topic. The Sea of Cortez is probably one of the world's most underrated dive destinations, but it's also right in our backyard. So in order to dive here, probably the easiest way to get there is just to fly to Phoenix. So a lot of people don't realize that all you have to do is go to Phoenix, cross the border into Mexico, and you're right at the shores of the Sea of Cortez. So one of the only landlocked states that I would consider moving to is Arizona for that reason. Um, Now, the Sea of Cortez is an interesting body of water. It's very narrow. It goes all the way up the coast of Baja, and it's very complicated. It's very complex. And that complexity really yields itself to very interesting life. So this presentation is actually going to be more about the small critters of the Sea of Cortez. And if we have some time at the end of all this, I can show you guys some of the actual landscapes and seascapes and larger animals. But I wanted to talk about the little stuff because um, they're all so charismatic and so different than anywhere else I've been. And it's a very different style of diving as well. That was a great introduction. Thanks so much. I had a little bit about me. So I'm the president of Blue Water Photo. I'm a trip leader and partner at Blue Water Travel, where I do a lot of my underwater photo workshops. I run the underwater photography guide, and I've got a background in aquatic and fishery science biology, and spent 4 years as a marine biologist. Yeah, if you guys have any questions at any point, whether it's about, you know, the animals themselves or the photography, feel free to interrupt me. And then
Okay,
finally,
okay, what's
okay,
snoot photography?
snoop photography. That's a great question. And I'll talk more about that during this presentation. So, snoop photography is the concept of creating a very small ring of light. We're talking 1 to 3 inches to put over your subject in order to isolate it. And I'll show you some examples of what that really does. And you really do need to do that with these small animals that are in the sand in the Sea of Cortez. One thing I should have asked is how long do I have?
45 minutes to an hour is our maximum with Q&A.
Perfect. Okay. I will try to keep to that. Great. So starting out here, and like I said, feel free to interrupt. It's kind of hard for me to see everybody. All I see is my screen right here. Um, and I'm actually going to turn my light on so I don't look at just a shadow. Um, yeah, the Sea of Cortez is really where the desert meets the sky. It's one of the most remote places that you could dive, even if it is in our backyard. I've been on full trips there, 10 days long, and not seen another boat, which is incredible. I can't think of anywhere else in the world where it's like that. But there's just not that many dive operations out there, and beyond that, there's not really anybody out there. Now, that said, there are a lot of little towns as you get south towards the Sea of Cortez, but what I'm going to be talking about more is the northern Sea of Cortez. So in the Sea of Cortez, there's about 900 islands. It's got one of the most diverse seas on this planet, with up to 900 species of fish, 5 species of turtle, and 32 species of marine mammals. Now, what I thought was really interesting is how endemic everything is. There's so many species that are unique to the Sea of Cortez, and it's because of 2 reasons. One, you have complex currents going through these islands as the tides go in and out every day. As the full moon comes, the tides can change, and as the season changes, you can get differences in temperature, which really produce a wide range of life. But beyond that, a lot of the rock is actually porous. And what's interesting about porous rocks is it creates lots of cracks and crevices in the rock, which actually allow for more habitat for animals. And because of that, you actually have an increase of diversity in some of the smaller critters that you find in the Sea of Cortez. So what my presentation is it's about finding all those small critters, all those very colorful jewels in the sand in what is usually a pretty nondescript place to dive. If you were to take just a diver straight from open water, place them in the Sea of Cortez, they would, for the most part, be unimpressed because especially in the midriff islands, it just looks like sand. And in some places, you do have some algae, you might have some black coral, and you'll have some sea lions and some sardines. But in a lot of the sites, all you really see is the same kind of topography that you do above water, which is dry desert, sand, rock, and it's pretty harsh terrain, but it's relatively nondescript. So what's interesting is to me is really looking deep into that sand, understanding what the difference in substrate is like between each site, and trying to understand what animals would live in that kind of substrate and then finding them and photographing them. So that's what this presentation is about. In the northern Sea of Cortez, there's 55 major islands, and they happen to be a lot more complex than the rest of the Sea of Cortez. And that's where you see all the really interesting jewels in the sand, and it's because of that complexity. So on a single dive, I've seen a difference in temperature from 68 degrees to 83 degrees. Um, and that's huge. What that means is you get these big thermoclines, you get big changes in visibility. You could have 100 feet of visibility on one dive and 10 feet of visibility on the next. And those changes are really what produce that life. So this was the only photo that I had of the sandy bottom, but it gives a good example of what the bottom looks like in the Sea of Cortez. So what you're looking for is little things in that sand and in that substrate. And you can see here you've got rocky reef, you have some algae, and then you just have different coarseness of types of sand. Um, so I'll be talking about different animals and the kind of sand and the substrate that they live in and their life history, and you get a better idea of, okay, this is what I can expect or this is what I can look for if you do happen to get to go there. But each one of these animals is very charismatic. They all dance, they all fight. It's like watching a play when you're diving there. So the first character in this play is the blue spotted jawfish. It's one of the easiest animals to find in the Sea of Cortez, especially the northern Sea of Cortez, if you know where to look. They're about 2 to 3 inches in size, so they're a little bit larger than some of the other animals I'm going to be talking about. They burrow in classic sand, so I would say relatively coarse. So it's not going to be muddy, but coarse sand, brown. And what they do is they kind of burrow into it and they grab a bunch of sand with their mouth. They have really big mouths and they spit it out. So that's one of the most interesting things to see. You can see most of the jawfish when you do find them, they're just grabbing sand and they're spitting it out constantly. Um, Now, the males are really unique. They tend to basically hover above their dens, maybe like 5 to 6 inches above the bottom, and then they shoot back down every few seconds. So they'll basically swim up to the top above their den, shoot back down, and then they keep doing that. And what they're trying to do is attract a mate. They're also fairly active during the daytime, unlike other kinds of jawfish, which you would find mostly at night. And when they're above those dens, flashing for the females, they'll also eat plankton and copepods in the water. So a couple tips for photographing blue spotted jawfish. The easiest way to find them is you want to go to the base of the reef where it turns from reef to sand, and you want to look for a white flash. And where you see that white flash, you'll start to notice these little holes in the sand, and you'll see a flash here and a flash there and a flash there. And once you see the white flashes, you know the males are out and they're being active. Once you get within a couple of feet to the males, they start to get a lot more cautious and they'll go back into the sand. So I usually recommend using a longer macro lens to take photos of them, like a 105 millimeter macro on a full frame camera, or if you have, let's say, a micro four thirds camera, that would be a 60 millimeter. But that allows you to get a little bit farther back because otherwise what they do is they kind of pull back into their hole, just like this jawfish here, with its head poking out of the sand. Now they're very pretty. You can still get the nice blue spots and the yellow eyes, but they're a lot more impressive when you have the full body length out of the hole. Now, what I like to look for is the jawfish that are clearing their dens of sand, because you can get really interesting photos like this one, where the sand is literally coming out of their mouths and it turns into this giant sandstorm of sand. So the way that I like to get this photo is I'll watch the the jawfish, sorry, go in and out of the sand, and I focus on it as soon as it comes out. Now, usually the first shot is not going to be the shot to get the photo because they just go so fast. But once I lock my focus, I usually put my camera in autofocus single, so I don't use autofocus continuous. I use autofocus single and lock the focus. Once that jawfish comes back into the same place and I'm anticipating it, I can hit my shutter and hopefully get this kind of shot. Now, we talked a little bit about snoot photography. These guys don't like snoots, and snoots are basically devices that go on your strobe that make the light a lot smaller so that you can get this nice black background behind this jawfish. And I actually did use a snoot for this guy. In order to do that, I had to place my snoot really high up, like 3 feet up or a couple feet up on a long arm, and very far forward to try to get him comfortable enough to come out of the den. So if you're going to use a snoot, you do have to put it on a longer arm and just try to get it out of the way. If they see anything above their den, they just stay in there, and then you won't see them. Another thing that you can do to get good photos or videos of these guys is you just leave your camera in the sand and you leave it rolling. So I'll leave my camera on record, put it in the sand, and eventually they start coming up and they start spitting out the sand from their den and they start going out into the water column. Now, this was something fun that I was kind of playing around with on each of these subjects. So this is called a magic tube. And a magic tube basically fits over the front of your port, and it's a tube of metal that has reflections on the inside. So you can get these really cool effects, these swirl effects over your subject.
Pretty.
Oh, do I have a question?
No, I just said it's pretty.
Oh, yeah.
Like it.
So those are the blue spotted jawfish. And the second in kind of the big three of underwater critters, my favorite fish that I find in the Sea of Cortez is the orange throat pike blenny. Now, these guys, very rarely you can actually find them in Southern California, but they're more common in Baja all the way down to Ecuador. Now, orange throat pike blennies are interesting because they are very nondescript, especially the females. The females will kind of look like, well, they'll look like a fish that you would just ignore. This really small, 5 to 6 inch fish, but very thin, that would be in the sand. And the males kind of look the same until they start to actually do that dance and attract females. So when you're looking for these guys, you want to look for coarser sand with more shells and slightly more pebbles, and you want to look for vacated worm casings. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen feather duster worms or those kind of worms, but if you find a worm casing like that, where the worm is no longer inhabiting it, sometimes you might see a little uh, pike blenny sticking out of that worm casing, just like this. This guy was in a worm casing, and you'll see his little head. So what I usually do is I look for that worm casing with a male in it, and the females will usually be out, and they'll start to undulate a little bit like a snake around the male. And what the male will do is it'll come up from the hole or from the worm casing, and it'll bounce up and down. And it looks like it's an incredible dance. It kind of arches its back, its mouth is wide open, and they just bounce up and down continuously. And sometimes they move around in a circle. Sometimes they're just going straight up and down. But their throat comes out and it's bright and orange and really pretty. So what you'll have is multiple females starting to approach that male. So with pike blenny photos, what I like to do is I like to watch how they're dancing. And wherever the top point is of their dance, because they're going up and down so quickly, I try to focus on the blenny and then move my camera so it's pointed up towards the top reach of the dance. And that way you won't cut off their head, because what I often find is these blennies, they jump up so quickly up and down that you get a photo of their body, but their head is above that. So I always try to move my camera a little bit higher up, and I wait for the male to kind of bounce up. Now, sometimes you have to wait for them to actually face you. So these guys, they take a little bit longer to photograph, even if they're not as skittish as the jawfish. So what I usually do is I might spend 20, even 30 minutes just waiting for the fish to get in the right moment. And when you do, it's a really incredible effect. The lower that you can get when you're photographing these guys, the better. And they're a lot better subjects for snoots. So what I like to do with snoot photography, or even strobe photography, is because they're not as skittish, I take my snoot or my strobe and put it directly over the top of the blenny. And what that does is it creates this really dramatic look where you have the spotlight effect and you're separating it from the background. Because you have such a sandy background in the Sea of Cortez, and it's a really complex background, it's really nice to have just light on the fish itself. And when you have a small ring of light, you don't get light behind it, and therefore you can get this nice background separation. Now, that said, another way to get background separation is you can open up your aperture and shoot at a lower f-stop. which allows you to get this nice blur in the background, which is called bokeh. So that's two ways of taking photos of subjects that tend to blend in with their environment a little bit.
Hirapam, was that in the daytime that you did that shot right there, or was that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is in the daytime. The way I got the black background is one, I had a snoot. So I just had a strobe, and the strobe had a barrier on it that made it smaller. I think it might have been the Merilux Soft in this case. And the second thing that you have to do is you have to shoot at a high shutter speed, which freezes the frame, and a high f-stop. That eliminates all the ambient light from hitting your camera, and all you have left is strobe light. So it looks dark. It looks like it's nighttime, even though this is the middle of the day. Now, if we look at this photo, which to some people might look like a bad photo, to me it's a concept that I'm working on, and I hope I can actually perfect this the next time I go to the Sea of Cortez. And that's why I love going back. It's like every time you go back, you find the same critters, you find the same behavior, and you're trying to perfect your shot. So I get these ideas in my head. What do I want to do? Well, what I was trying to do here was lower my shutter speed to try to get the motion of the male blenny going up and down. And I kind of got it. You can see that the motion is around its head, but it doesn't quite show the dance. Now, what it does show is it shows the tube that it lives in. So you can see that the sand has a little bit more particles and pebbles in it, and it has this tube, and it's going up and down in that tube. Now, because that shutter speed is lower, you can actually see the color of the water, which is blue and green, which is it's showing it's basically during the daytime. And it's the same lighting. I have the strobe from the top. Now, here is a magic tube photo. So again, it's a little bit gimmicky, but magic tubes are really easy to use. You just have to put your focus point in the middle because your subject has to be in the middle. And with these photos, I actually don't usually use a snoot. You can, and it'll create that nice background, that black background behind it. But it's a lot easier to shoot. So I'll just have two strobes, one on either side, use the magic tube for a little bit of a swirl, and it makes it look kind of like it pops out of the frame itself. It almost looks like the fish is coming out, which is kind of neat. So, all right. So this guy is the crown jewel of the Sea of Cortez. This is the signal blenny. Now, until I wrote an article about signal blennies in the underwater photography guide, and I'd say until fairly recently, they were a little bit overlooked. But once I published that article, I believe Blue Planet 3 might do a little series on them, or the pike blenny. They haven't decided yet. But they reached out to me about both animals, and they wanted to talk about, which one they should feature because the behavior is so interesting. And there is another TV show, I think on BBC or PBS, that features signal blennies. Now, signal blennies, in my opinion, are one of the most beautiful animals on this planet. And it doesn't look like that here, I know. I'll get to those photos. Uh, but they're so unique in their behavior, and they're so small. They're only about 2 inches maximum. So what you end up looking for is you look for the two little neon antennas in the sand. And if you can find the two little neon antennas, you can find the blenny attached to it. So their habitat is very specific. There's a site called Submarine in Loreto, Mexico, which is probably the best place to find signal blennies, but you can find them all over the Sea of Cortez. And they like coarse sand with rocky rubble. And the rocky rubble is usually encrusted with coralline algae or pink algae. And on those rocks, you find little barnacle holes. And in the little barnacle holes are where the signal blennies live. So if you can find that kind of substrate and you can start looking, it took me a couple years to really be able to see these guys and find these guys myself. But when you do, you start to get some practice, and they do become easier to find. The reason they're so hard to find is they're very, very shy. They're more shy than any of the animals that you'll see in the Sea of Cortez. You could be 7 feet away and they go back in their hole. So you really have to find those two little neon antenna. And one of the ways you can make some of these animals less shy is if you hide behind your camera and you focus on your camera and you don't make eye contact with any of these guys, whether it's a jawfish, signal blenny, or pike blenny, they will become more comfortable with you because you just become part of the environment. So the males here are evenly distributed across the seafloor. And when they go up to signal, they're not doing it because they're looking for a mate. They're actually doing it because they're territorial. So they're ready to fight. And when they're ready to fight, they turn green and white. So that's how you know that they're angry. So they change color like that, like in a second. And they do fight to the death. So it can be kind of crazy to see sometimes. So this is an angry signal blenny. You can see how quickly it changes color. And it's not the same one, but that's how they change color. And when they get angry, their mouth kind of opens up and they get big. Uh, so what I recommend when shooting these guys, they're very, very, very difficult. You want to use a long macro lens, like I mentioned before, as long as you can get. I think Olympus has a 200 millimeter macro lens now, or 190. Ideally, that would be the most ideal lens. If you can get a 105 macro, if you have a full frame camera, that's great. Um, and what I try to do is when they do start getting angry or they start signaling or get territorial, their dorsal fin goes up. And that's what's so beautiful about them. So I'll look for the dorsal fin and I'll try to focus where that dorsal fin is to get the colors in focus. Now, one thing you can try to do to get the photo is you could try to find a signal blending that's not moving too much and use an intervalometer on your camera basically to take photos like a time lapse. Every, maybe couple of seconds, it'll take a photo. So that's one way. That way you can swim away and leave the camera there taking photos. Um, Now, another way that has become kind of a popular thing, so you will see it, which I don't really condone, is using a mirror. So I guess it's not as harmful as putting them together, which is something I've also seen. Um, but they do get angry at the reflection. They get angry at proximity to other blennies. Now, I've run into blennies that have been fighting naturally, but there's this tendency for photographers to put them together, um, and I don't really feel good about that. If you're gonna do it, make sure they're
Excuse
far
me,
apart.
but how would they get two of those blennies together? Grab them, or how would you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So remember, they're so small that they actually like if, people sometimes will move rocks together, like they live in these rocks. And then they start fighting, but when they do that, they start fighting to the death. So when I see that, I pull those away. Like, yeah, so that's kind of like this habit I've seen photographers do um, lately. Uh, Again, it's like you can find them fighting naturally, but they don't usually fight as aggressively when they're fighting naturally because they've already got their space. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like if you do see people doing that on trips, dive masters will do that. I had one dive master that he was a bit childish. He's a good friend of mine, but I didn't really like what he was doing. He would put them together in a circle and call it the Coliseum. And so I would, if I saw that, I would just pull those apart and I'd talk to him after that. So, now this guy was out in the open and he was fighting with other blennies. Every now and then you'll find them out in the open. It's really hard to find. But you can see just how small they are with the substrate and the sand and these pebbles. And when they're out in the open and they don't have a home, that's when they start to get their dorsal fin up and start to get aggressive because they're going to look for a home and they're going to fight for a home. Um, so that's kind of a lucky shot if you can find it. This is also a great example of snoot photography. I again had a small snoot, put it over the subject, and that eliminated the background, which is all sand and probably less interesting. So this is another snoot shot, and you can see the colors here. Um, so this here is a black one. And you can see this one's aggressive. He's seen another male. This one is a just one that's showing his territory, saying, "Hey, I'm here. This is my territory." When they're black, they're not stressed out. They're just showing, "Hey, this is where I live."
Can I ask what they look like when they're mating? Is it any different?
That's a good question. I've never seen them mating, and The females are very drab. I've seen a couple females. They're very brown. They don't have the dorsal. Um, Sometimes they will come up to male that's flashing, but for the most part, these colors are coming from other males. So yeah, I'd love to see one mating. I've never seen one, but um, this photo is kind of interesting. I actually used a snoot here to get the black background, and I had a magic tube on top of the port. So I was able to get the black background and have the magic tube. Um, and yeah, it creates that swirl effect, which is pretty cool. Any other questions about signal blennies? They're kind of the creme de la creme.
I've never seen one, and I've been in Sea Cortez many times. Now I want to go back and find those.
They're pretty amazing. They're super hard to find, but I found them all the way from the northern tip of the Sea of Cortez all the way down to La Paz. Um, it's just that very specific type of substrate that I mentioned. If you see two little antennae, that's how you know that they're there. And if you stay back maybe 5 to 7 feet, you can see this little tiny flash where they put up their dorsal fin. It's not as impressive when you don't have the camera. They're very small, a couple of inches. So these are barnacle blennies or brown cheek blennies. There's two types that you see in the Sea of Cortez. They're also very small, but they're a lot more friendly to photographers. And they actually come out regularly and they'll fight with each other regularly. So if you're lucky, you can see two males that are fighting on the rocks and they'll have their mouths open and they'll be attacking each other. But if you find them, they're actually really easy to find. You just need to find a big boulder and look for a tiny barnacle hole, and you'll see the two little eyes. Because they have these blue spots on their nose, you can actually see the little blue, like the small blue area just coming out from that little barnacle. Um, and that's how you know that they're there. Two little eyes looking at you. Because they don't mind photographers, when you're taking photos of them, you want to use an extra macro lens. So a lot of photographers will have already their normal macro lens on top of their camera. If you can get a macro diopter, like a plus 13 or even a plus 22, and you can actually stack that diopter on top of the macro lens, then you can get really close to the blenny and you can get all these details. Because this guy that I took a photo of is probably only a few millimeters at most. But the colors are really pretty. They're bright red on their face and blue, and they do have that big brown cheek, but they're really, really interesting. So this was with a snoot. Again, I think snoots are kind of the common theme with these guys because they blend in so easily into their environment. You can see his mouth is starting to open up, so he was probably looking at my snoot and wondering what I was doing because I had my light directly over him. But once they start to get aggressive, they'll open their mouth and they'll start to fight each other like that. And you can see just how magnified this is because um, you can see the polyps of the coral. It looks like little cup corals on the rock. So that's pretty cool. Now, blue-banded gobies are probably something that you guys have seen. Blue-banded gobies live in California, in Southern California especially, so if you dive down in the Channel Islands. But they also live all the way through the northern Sea of Cortez. And what I think is so interesting is you have blue-banded gobies on the Pacific side in the Channel Islands, Catalina, all the way down to maybe Tijuana. But underneath that, where it starts to get really tropical, like in Cabo, you don't really see blue-banded gobies. Somehow, you see them again as you get to the northern Sea of Cortez, all the way from basically Arizona down to Loreto. You'll see these guys. And they're also very small. They live on big boulders in crevices. So usually I'll look at the base of boulders, little caves, crevices, you'll find them in there. And there'll be one larger male that'll be guarding a lot of smaller females, and that's their harem. And they can actually change sex. They're pretty skittish, but they're approachable as long as you don't look at them in the eye. So again, if you get close with your lens, sometimes they see the reflection, they get aggressive and they come closer. So that's what happened with this guy. I had a Canon 100 millimeter lens. he came really close. And that lens can actually do super macro because it's the RF 100. So I was able to get even closer and get that cool profile. Oh, and it really helps with these guys not to breathe. Although I don't recommend that while you're diving, but if you can breathe really slowly, um, and you don't have bubbles, they're gonna stay longer. So here's another shot. And then this was kind of a cool one with the magic tube that just really shows that reflection on the tube, which I thought was kind of a neat look. Now, moving on from little fish, there's plenty of nudibranchs in the Sea of Cortez, and I couldn't do this presentation without mentioning them. There's 100 species of nudibranchs. Now, the best way to find and photograph them is to just look for their food. For the most part, they're on hydroids, but you can also find them based on knowing what they eat. So if you see a tamba nudibranch, you should look for a tiger nudibranch because the tigers eat the tambas and they look the same, which is kind of crazy. These guys, Elysia diomedea or diomeda, they eat algae and they actually keep the chloroplast from the algae they eat. So you can see this one's eating algae here. And they'll put the chloroplasts in their mantle and they'll actually use that to photosynthesize. So these guys are just using the sun to eat. And because of that, you'll find them in the shallows. But nudibranchs in the Sea of Cortez are more abundant in areas with high current and upwelling. So again, that northern Sea of Cortez area, the Midriff Islands, are great for finding nudibranchs. So I've got my assortment of nudies. You might notice one that's actually pretty similar. So to something that you might have seen. They do get Spanish shawls, and it's kind of the same thing. It's only the northern Sea of Cortez that get the Spanish shawls, even though they're separated by the Baja Peninsula. I do notice that the Spanish shawls are a different kind of color cast. They've got whiter tentacles on the top, on the front, and they just look slightly different than the ones in California. But you have some really neat nudies as well. You've got the Tombo on the top right here, and then on the bottom left is a tiger, and you can see how similar they look. So what you'll see is if you see a Tamba, start looking in the sand, and the tigers they're like tigers. I mean, they go really fast through the sand, and they'll catch these guys and eat them. So it's like a mini safari on the Serengeti.
Very many.
Very many, and a little slower.
Aw.
There's a few other notable gems that you can find in that sand and in the algae. Like I said, kind of nondescript substrate, but sometimes in the right kind of algae, you can find seahorses if you're very lucky. Now these guys, obviously you're usually out there alone, so it's kind of they're not really at risk of getting poached, but poaching has really caused an issue with seahorses and their populations have declined a lot. So if you do see seahorses in a more populated area, let's say around Loreto or La Paz, don't mention it because somebody could always come and poach them, which is an issue that's happened there and also in the Galapagos. These are one of my favorite fish. They're all over the Sea of Cortez. You'll find them on almost any dive you go on. They're called lizard triple fins, and for the most part, nobody notices them. But what's so cool about them is they have these bright red eyes and these red stripes. And I've been trying to get this shot for a long time, and I finally did one year. But this is basically a sea star, and the Sea of Cortez sea stars are very bright red, very pretty. So I have always wanted to get a lizard triple fin on a sea star. I thought the contrasting colors would be kind of neat. What also really helps this photo is you've got these diagonal lines, and when you have a diagonal line with both the fish and the sea star, it really helps your composition. It kind of creates this leading edge. And I made sure not to cut off the tail and leave a little bit of space in the front so it looks like it's moving. And that's proper composition. So this is one of my favorite photos I've taken in the Sea of Cortez because it's two common subjects with beautiful color tones and just proper composition from a textbook perspective. So now these guys are pretty cool. So you have two types of jawfish. You have this fine spot jawfish and the giant jawfish. They're really hard to tell apart, but they're much bigger than your blue spotted jawfish. These guys are, I would say, softball size. And if you do ever take a trip to the Sea of Cortez, you've probably seen this. The dive masters like to feed them, so they'll bring shrimp over, and these guys will come out and grab the shrimp. But they're pretty cautious fish, but they like to kind of peek out of their hole. So you can get this type of photo. For the most part, this is the only photo I've really gotten from them. They don't make interesting compositions. You just get this head peeking up out of the hole. Every now and then you might see them pop out, but that's pretty lucky. They only pop out for a second or two. They're big. But a snoot again really helps here because you have the substrate. If you get the head popping up over, you can get a really cool look over here. Now these guys are all over the place too, and they're some of my favorite critters. They're I think Panamic arrow crabs, and they're very three-dimensional. You've got these like really long arms, you have these claws, and these two eyes in the center. So they're one of the most difficult subjects to photograph because you need to have everything in focus, which is very hard to do, and they're so three-dimensional. It's like, how do you get all that in focus? Well, the answer is you don't. So you have to kind of pick your poison and choose what you want in focus. So I like to get the eyes in focus, and then what I do is I try to separate it again from my background so that the focus is on the eyes and the background isn't too distracting. So what I did here was I used a snoot on top, and I had the light coming in from the top with just a little ring of light, and then I had the magic tube. And the combination of the snoot and the magic tube really puts your perspective on the arrow crab, which typically, I don't know if you've seen other photos of arrow crabs, typically they look like these spindly things just in front of a rock. Um, so they're pretty cool, and you'll see them kind of in caves and crevices.
Mirpam, can I ask about that magic tube? Because I've never heard of it before.
Yeah.
How do you manipulate the colors you're getting from that tube? Because
No, so that's a great question. So a magic tube, like I said, it's basically a mirror, right? It's like this metal tube that goes out from your port. It's made by Saga, so you can always check out our website. It's a little overpriced in my opinion. It's about $125 for a tube, but it is worth it in the sense that you get interesting photos. So the colors are coming from the subject. So what you're getting reflected in there is actually the reflections of the subject itself, and that's why you get, this interesting, if you look, the color is the same. And if you look at some of the previous shots, like with the signal blennies and especially with these orange throat pike blennies, you can see the orange and you can see the blue and the black. So they really reflect the subject. So if you get a colorful subject, they can look really cool.
Okay. Great.
Now, when you're editing photos like that, I usually recommend a radial filter, a radial mask over the center, and then I'll bring up the highlights from the magic tube because it can be a little bit duller when you actually take the photo, and that'll bring the colors out a lot better. Now, this here is a pretty rare thing. I forgot the exact species name, but it's a frogfish, basically. I forgot the exact type of species. I've seen these guys maybe like 3 or 4 times while diving in the Sea of Cortez. They usually live in crevices. So if you're looking at certain sites, if you look in cracks, you can see these guys kind of peeking out at you. And sometimes they're upside down. Like this guy was actually upside down when I took the photo. Um, but the reason I have such interesting lighting here is not because I had a snoot, but because the rock was blocking it. So the only thing that my strobe lit was the frogfish because the rock was making shadows for the rest of the area. So even though this was a daytime photo, I didn't use a snoot. I just used my strobes. And I had a high shutter speed and high aperture to get detail, but to also make sure I only got strobe light, no ambient light. So skeleton shrimp are really interesting. You can find them all around the world. And in the Sea of Cortez, where you find them is actually on, believe it or not, scorpionfish. And it's not just on scorpionfish. You have to find them on the eyes of scorpionfish. So scorpionfish are really common in the Sea of Cortez. They kind of live in the algae and on the substrate. If you look on their eye, you can see this little ridge, as you can see in the bottom left. So that's one of their spines, and on that there'll often be a scorpionfish. I mean, not a scorpionfish, a skeleton shrimp. So that's a skeleton shrimp, and that little red dot is the eye. They're really tiny. And then I wanted to end the presentation with my favorite blenny that I found in the Sea of Cortez. I actually don't know the species name. I just know that one dive master that I've dived with on the Rocio del Mar, he no longer dives with them, but he knew where to find this guy, and he's the only one that I know who ever did. It was one of the smallest blennies I've ever photographed, maybe a couple millimeters, like 2 to 3 millimeters, on the underside of a rock, really deep. We call them rock star blennies because of the little tuff on the top, and they're really, really colorful and pretty. Now, I actually had my f-stop here, I think around F between F13 and F18. Usually that's a pretty high f-stop and you should be able to get a lot of detail. But when blennies get that small, you really need to be at F22 or even more. You start to get diffraction, but I would even recommend starting to get up to F30 to get enough of the image in focus. So I made a mistake here. I didn't have a high enough f-stop. Unfortunately, this was the only time I really got to photograph him. I was getting pretty close to deco, and this was the one shot I got. So.
No problem. Was that gentleman's name Bob?
No, that was Tico.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because Bob, when I was on my second trip, he was showing me all sorts of stuff, including frogfish.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Bob is a great dive master. I asked for him to be there on my summer trip, so hopefully he shows up this summer. I think you're gonna be there, Lisa. Um, but yeah, yeah, there's some really good dive masters out there, and it's totally different from diving Socorro or diving the Southern Sea of Cortez. It's like all these small things, and that's what you're looking for. It's kind of like being an Anilao, but the difference is, or another muck diving destination. But the real difference is, like in a muck diving destination, especially in Southeast Asia, you see all these animals everywhere, right? And you just go from one animal to the next, and you take photos of them. In the Sea of Cortez, you're very much going on a hunt. You're looking in the sand, you're looking for these subjects, you do the research on where to find them, what kind of substrate, and you study their behavior once you do, so that once you get there, you get that opportunity to take that photo. It's a lot more difficult, but it's a lot more rewarding at the same time. And once you do see those animals, they're so charismatic, they're so interesting. So it's really a pleasure to take photos of them.
Were most of these in the midriff island area, or where do you find most of this critters, the smaller critters?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most are in the Midriff Island area. This guy here was actually in Loretto, so a little bit farther south. The signal blennies, I have the best luck in Loretto at a dive site called the Submarine. So if you're ever like, I'm gonna go to Mexico just for signal blennies, go to Submarine in Loretto and dive with Blue Nation. But a lot of the signal blennies are also Midriff Islands. All these small stuff for the most part. There are some signal blenny photos I've taken in La Paz. So like I said, a lot of these subjects do go down that far south. But often because once you hit the southern Sea of Cortez, you start getting, big schools of fish, you start getting sea lions. I often just don't have a macro lens on me. So I'm not thinking about that when I do see these guys. But in the midriffs, you really do, like, that's the focus of the dives there.
So near, we do have some questions out
Yeah.
there. So we could.
Yeah. Two questions. One, do you ever use rebreathers to minimize or to eliminate bubbles so you can get closer? And the second question is, what is the quality of sea life in the Sea of Cortez over the last decade or so because of climate change and pollution?
Yeah, two very, very good questions. One, I don't ever use rebreathers, but I do want to go that direction, partly for that reason. And I do think it'll be a big benefit to have a rebreather. One of the techniques I use is I let my camera roll and I just swim away. And another technique that you can use is just take really long breaths and I sit for a while. I mean, on these trips, especially if it's like a photo workshop like we're doing, it's pretty common for us to each find a subject and just stay with it for almost an hour. So a lot of the times those photos that you're seeing, I've been waiting with that subject for, anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, just waiting for it to get in the right position. And that's kind of the key. Now, when it comes to actual life and how it's changed, recently the Sea of Cortez has gotten really warm. I've done dives there, like I said, probably when I first started diving there, I would see, dives from um, like 68 degrees all the way up to 86 in one trip, maybe 83. Now it's more consistently like 78 to 86. So it's a lot warmer. The water's a little bit more clear. The currents are a little less. And I think because of that, I expect it to affect diversity in life. But that said, a lot of these animals, the small stuff in the sand, they're the most hardy. They're the animals that you're going to find everywhere, and they're actually more common than other animals. So I don't think for these subjects that it'll cause much of a problem. Uh, Now that said, I have seen hammerheads more often in the Midriff Islands, which used to never happen. But now I see hammerheads on like every other trip, which is pretty incredible. And I think part of that is because that water is changing a little bit. But there's also less fishing over time. There are less squid and less sperm whales in the last 10 years as well. It used to be pretty consistent. We'd see sperm whales every trip, and now I wouldn't say that's the case at all. Um, so there are less, I think, marine mammals and less squid.
Question?
Question.
Yep.
Great presentation. So I have three questions. Are
Okay.
you primarily diving when? It's summer, fall, winter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, um, let's see. And it's kind of interesting because these subjects do have mating seasons, and I would say the best time to go is probably August. That's usually when we go. I have seen great diving though with mating and active animals in July. I've also seen them pretty active all the way through October. So I would say going between July and October is a great time to be there, with August being peak season. And there are fluctuations. Like sometimes one species, like the signal blennies, will be active, then another species, like the pike blennies, will be active. So it kind of depends. It depends on the dive site as well. Um,
And also,
yeah,
is it, are you on a liveaboard or are you
yes.
doing day trips out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in the Midriff Islands specifically, I dive on the Rocio del Mar. Um, and I believe they're going to retire the Kino El Guardian. So that's another boat that used to go there, but it's being replaced with the Kino del Mar. So they're going to have a new boat. I think Nautilus also dives up there as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Um, and other than that, there's not really other ways to get there. Now, that said, if you want to go a little farther south in Loretto, Blue Nation is an amazing dive operator. They're more of a shore-based operator, uh,
okay.
and I'm very good friends with them, and they're great. They're a smaller boat, but it'll get you
Smaller
to,
boats are fine.
yeah, it'll get you to places.
Smaller boats are fine.
Yeah.
And do you kind of coach the dive masters, some dive masters will rush you along, you keep going, and I always find myself way in the back because I've decided to sit down and take a look.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think the dive masters I dive with are particularly used to me in my groups, since we go every year. And the dive masters know, uh, like, hey, we're going to be sitting with these blennies for 70 minutes. And some of them are really into that, and some get a little bored. But the dive masters that are really into it are really good at showing, people how to do that, and proper technique for taking these photos. So it is more like of a Analao style dive, like a Southeast Asia style dive, where you sit there. The dive masters don't go very far, and they'll find subjects for you to look at.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, in the Southern Sea of Cortez, that's why I don't bring the macro lens. Most of the dives are focused on La Paz. I mean, sorry, not like sea lions, big schools of fish, and then the dive masters are going a bit faster, so it's less conducive to this kind of photography. And that's why I think the midriffs are so unique. Like everybody that goes there knows that that's kind of the purpose of doing it.
Have you gone to Cabo Pulmo and done anything like this?
Yeah, so I've gone to Cabo Pulmo. There is a trip that we run called Explore Baja, and that goes all the way from Puerto Penasco, basically Arizona, down to Cabo. And there's a stop in Cabo Pulmo. Cabo Pulmo is really known for like the big schools of fish, the big jacks, big groupers. And for the most part, I would recommend sticking with a wide angle lens there. You can find like signal blennies. I found them there. I found blue spotted jawfish down there. But it's not really the lens that you want at that moment. Um, Now, that being said, in La Paz, there's a place called Swanee Reef, which is a really beautiful reef. It reminds me of the Caribbean, actually. It's one of the only
Shallow,
places.
shallow, right? The
It's
shallow
really
reef area.
shallow. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I
where the
found signal bunnies.
damselfish are breeding.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's so cool seeing them
Yeah,
breed there.
yeah,
Uh, so that's a good place to find signal bunnies. And you can also find blue spotted jawfish. And sometimes I'll go with a macro lens and just look for those guys.
yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for the presentation. Really awesome. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks. Um,
Questions here? Well, Nirpam, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I mean, Tia Cortez. We'll have to get back into macro, all of us that learned the animals after this.
Yeah.
And that magic tube or whatever you have, that's just amazing. Man.
And you're
Yeah.
going to share.
Yeah, that's amazing. Anyway,
Share your screen here, Paul.
Highly recommend learning photography from this gentleman here. Just wrapping it up for tonight. Thanks everybody for coming out in this horrible weather. I know it's tough with the season being rainy and all. But next month I want to let you know that we're going to have some incredible two young women who are doing some amazing work out there for the environment. And I actually dive with these women on the subject they're going to talk about, which is a virtual reality game that they developed when we were in the with a Sea Women's expedition. They were in the water pretending to be otters, and so they named their company Three Otters, and they are now developing VR games. And the one of their first games ever made is the one they're going to talk about next month, which is called Found in the Fjords, and it's really a beautiful game and we've never had anyone present to us about gaming and how they're doing it. And their goal is to teach and educate people to what's going on in the ocean. And it's a really cute story because it's based on our trip. And they are talking about this mother orca teaching her baby orca how to hunt in the fjords. So the people in our group are all characters in this and made animated in this game. And it ends with teaching young people how to do conservation. So it's a really wonderful thing. And these two women are amazing speakers and just fun to watch and hear as they're going places in this world of education and VR and technology for the future. So I would highly recommend coming to that. It's going to be Zoom, but in person as well. So please try to. And then following that, we have another amazing underwater award-winning photographer that's going to be presenting, Martin Brome. I haven't seen his work, but Ken said it's amazing. I think he lives in LA or the East Coast. I'm not sure. East Coast.
I met Martin when I was in New York for 3 months. I joined the Big Apple Start Club.
Yeah,
and
so
he gave this just stunning presentation.
And then the following month, we have Mike Boom. I don't know how many of you remember his video presentations, but he's a character, funny. His little video company's called Laughing Eel, and he's just a character, and he's going to show us his newest stuff from the Philippines. So lots of good stuff coming up. So I would highly recommend showing up for either on Zoom or in person, and we getting more members of our club to join. More members to join. Thanks, everybody. Any other questions? I think we covered everything, John.
I think you did.
All righty. So be safe. Go diving. Ken?
Stay dry.
What editing programs you use?
Oh, did you hear that? They wanted to know what editing programs you use for your work.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I use Adobe Lightroom Classic for my photos. And then for video, I use Adobe Premiere Pro.
Any other questions out there at home? No?
Stay warm and dry.
Yeah. So thank you very much once again. Okay, great
Thank you.
job.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
All right.
Send rain to us.
How are you, Will?
All right, good night, everybody. I'm gonna end the meeting, right now.
Okay.
Take it easy.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys.
Oh,
Good to
right.
be here.